Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mercy Unbound, a series that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today is a friend I met a few years ago at a healthcare conference, Divine Mercy Professionals, and Dr. Brian Burkey went to medical school at UVA, did his residency at Michigan, his fellowship at Ohio State, worked in Vanderbilt for 10 years or so, and then transferred up to the Cleveland Clinic where I trained. And recently moved to a little warmer weather over on the east coast of Florida. And I'm glad to welcome it as a fellow Floridian. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the key part of this will be delivering bad news to patients about their condition, and also a little bit about your own spiritual walk. You helped found the Archbishop Fulton Sheen Guild of Northeastern Ohio of the Catholic Medical Association. And we're involved in the Catholic Medical Association in Vanderbilt. I just wanted to ask you, as one involved in the CMA, tell us a little bit about the vision of that group and how your faith played a role in your practice as an ENT subspecialist dealing with head and neck cancer patients.
Right. Well, thanks, Brian. First of all, for being a friend and for allowing me on your show. It's a true honor. I have been a lifelong Catholic, and I think a fairly dedicated Catholic. I can still remember studying in college and taking one of the early entrances for medical school and literally praying for help on the test and just saying, God, your will be done. And literally during the test, worrying about it. And then one of the questions came up and I literally heard a voice with, it was an A, B, C, D, E question. And I heard D, as loud as could be. And looked around, there's nobody there. And I looked at the question, the answer was D as best I knew, So I kind of, from that moment on, always felt like God was with me on this journey of trying to take care of people that he entrusted to my care. So, and with that, we have different levels of growth within our lives, our faith lives. And so at different times, while I was a lifelong Catholic, I won't say that I always understood theology or the basis for why we believe what we believe, probably until maybe the last 20 years. And then my daughter was actually in a Dominican school, and I got to know the Dominican sisters pretty well. And I will give them much credit, One of them was actually subsequently one of my medical students at Vanderbilt and is a spectacular physician now in Nashville. So anyway, and then, as you mentioned, became associated with the Catholic Medical Association. When I left Nashville, we were very involved in the church and the Dominican life. And so I wanted to kind of keep that going in Cleveland. And so I did, in fact, try and find like-minded people. There weren't that many at that time in Cleveland, but ended up taking a course on bioethics at the seminary and met a group of 3 or 4 people. And honestly, one of them suggested that we try and form a guild of the Catholic Medical Association. And so we did. And I eventually became guild president, rotated in, and have since been very involved in the leadership of the Catholic Medical Association. And it's a great society to be part of. The vision is simple. 6 words: inspiring physicians to imitate Jesus Christ. And it's simple, but a big task. It's really, the Catholic Medical Association is primary aim is to form and support physicians who want to live and practice the principles of the Catholic faith in their medical practice. And that's really simply what we do. We have a bunch of outreaches for that, but that has really been a large part of it. So, with that, obviously, look, the first thing, if you want to take care of the people that Jesus entrusts to us, you have to provide excellent state-of-the-art care. And so that there's a lot of science behind it. But then again, to provide also, as you mentioned, hope, encouragement, and fellowship. I always say the best way to build a practice is to treat people like they are children of God, because in fact, everyone is a child of God, and every patient you see is a child of God. And if you treat them like that, they get that, right? They've generally never been treated like that before, unfortunately, in the healthcare. When you treat them like that, they get it, and they attach themselves to you very quickly. And so, and you can really bring them, right? As Sister or Saint Teresa of Calcutta said, the sick are in fact Jesus Christ in our hands. And if you treat them like that, they never forget that.
I guess in some ways the antithesis of the CMA and what you're talking about. Years ago, there was a point in my life when I was in practice, and I wasn't practicing that at all. And I remember one evening I was called in. A person was bleeding out, young alcoholic Mexican, was bleeding out, and I was trying sclerotherapy to stop his bleeding, and nothing was working, and he died there right on the table. And I just was so dismayed. I just went home, and I hadn't really reflected till years later about that man was preparing to see the Lord. And really, when you think of the CMA and you have the image of Jesus behind me, that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to be Jesus at the bedside, aren't you? And then you have to be able to handle all that stress and yet take it home and be Jesus in the family, because you still got a family. It's all about balance. How do you pull all that off?
Right. You hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of stress, and right now I'm, as you mentioned, starting a new practice in Florida. A lot of stress with change. No matter how I'm a 30-year veteran of this, right? And but everything is new and everything is stressful, and so I think about that a lot day to day now. Over the last month, I think always. The one great thing about Christianity, but Catholicism in particular, is that, it helps us to keep our focus on God, and ever more, I am sensitive to the fact that our success depends a lot on us just turning over our lives to God and letting God be in charge. And it's hard, but I will say that coming to Florida, weird story, but we were trying to find a vacation home, and of all the places we looked, we bought this one, and in Vero Beach, and I was moving in, and I found out the Cleveland Clinic was 3 miles away, from my house, and reached out, and initially they weren't interested in having somebody down, which was fine with me. I wasn't interested in moving. And then the next thing, they called a month later with, kind of a new job, partially administrative, partially clinical, and which is exactly what I was looking for. And I just felt, God was pushing me pretty hard in that direction, right? And who am I to turn away? But I do think, it takes a little bit of courage to do that. And as I've been going through this stress and whatnot, I think just, again, open communication with your family, but also a real tacit acknowledgement that God is in charge, right? And my wife and I were talking about that last night. There's some, little issues that pop up with change, but I said, look, this wasn't our decision anyway, and if God put us here, he's going to provide. So I think a lot of that, and then just, again, focus on being kind and loving, as Jesus showed us during, speaking during the Beatitudes and in his life on earth. I think I think we underestimate the importance of just being kind to people, including our family, and, being patient.
So you've got all the difficult cases, so to speak, and then you've got your family, but you've got the stressors going on in the people's minds of your patients and as an ENT person, you're seeing some bad cancers, and it's, again, you mentioned you're really just trying to be a reflection of Jesus to those people and give them hope, aren't you?
Right. That I've often said, this is my apostolate. I think again, I've learned that over time. This is my apostolate, my way of sharing my faith, in the temporal order, as in theological terms, and then it makes it easier. Again, it's not that I don't worry about patients and how they do. I worry about them all the time. But it is, and I think the more we do that, the more we grow in our faith too. Because I train residents and fellows throughout my whole career, medical students, and I say, as much as we like to believe we're in control, we don't control very much, right? And so for me, it's comforting to know that what I can't control, I can put in God's hands.
And it's refreshing for me to know and meet people like you, physicians, nurses, healthcare providers, who are trying to be that reflection of Jesus, because the world needs more love. And it's refreshing because I know that you're training residents, students, etc., and there's hope for down the road as well. And that's exciting for me.
Yeah, and I think I don't push the faith thing on my trainees at all. On the other hand, if you ask any of them, what's his faith tradition, they'll all tell you I'm Catholic, right? And quote unquote hardcore to them. I don't consider myself a hardcore Catholic, but what they see, and I was blessed to, when I left up there, I left my current students, obviously, to a very good team behind me, but they all wrote little notes to me. It was very touching, really. And I think they really touched on the fact that they loved the way I dealt with patients in clinic, that I just had a way that, patients felt at ease. Some of my patients wrote notes, and interestingly, they said, "We're glad you cured us of our cancer, but really what you gave us was hope and comfort when we first met you." That's what they remembered, interestingly. Now, they remembered it because we cured them and they're doing well, but we forget just the fear, right? As physicians, sometimes the fear that people have when they walk in our office, fear of disease, fear of the future. And, again, I get it. Jesus says, be not afraid, right? But that's the human side of us. We unfortunately cling to a certain amount of fear. So I think the more we can relieve that, the more we can show mercy to our patients.
You bring up a good point, though, about, in a sense, evangelization, because I'm reminded of, I think it was St. Francis said, evangelize always, and if you need to, speak.
Right.
They know your beliefs just by the way you act. You don't have to sit there and carry rosary beads and pray the rosary on rounds, and you don't have to, do other overt things, but it's the way you handle yourself, and it's the way you deal with people, and how you are a vessel of God's love. And I'm reminded of two of my favorite doctors are Joseph Moscati from Italy 100 years ago. And they said he used to give poor people come in and he'd see them for nothing. And he was always there if there were, I think there was a cholera outbreak, and he was the first one there to help move the patients out of the hospital. Dr. Jerome Lejeune, venerable, discovered the trisomy 21 Down syndrome, but he was so afraid that people were going to use this to promote abortion, and he stood up for his faith. And so, we stand up for the faith, we stand up for love and kindness and mercy, but we don't have to say a word. It's the way we act, isn't it?
It is, and it really is. And then, I tend to put little artifacts in my office. I have a crucifix and a Catholic calendar, and and I think those things, because people need to be reminded that niceness or that kindness, that love that we show is not necessarily coming out of some greatness of ours, right? It's because we're trying to be Jesus for our patients, right? And so I do, and I think people. One of my big heroes right now is Bishop Barron, and love to do, and he's so good at trying to use common things, to try and evangelize our culture. And I think, when I do a lot of long cases in the operating room, and we talk about a lot of things, but frequently, depending on the conversation and whatnot, it's amazing how often the daily readings have some applicability to something, and I remember one of my medical students in particular was a Jewish rabbi, and we used to have great theological discussions, on Elijah, and he'd talk to me and I'd talk to him, and the nice thing was it was this beautiful transfer of knowledge, right? But everybody in the room got to understand, right, our faith and our reason for it. Because as Catholics, the great thing about it, Pope Benedict was fantastic about this, is stressing that we should not be afraid of science, right? The world was created by God. The more we learn about it, the more we will recognize God in our existence, right? And we should not be afraid of that. And I could not be more in tune with that. One of the great things, just I want to go off on a tangent, but I remember, again, one of the very early meetings we had in Cleveland of the Bishop Sheen Guild for the Catholic Medical Association. We named ourselves after Bishop Sheen because he was so good at kind of evangelizing the culture, right? And we wanted to try and do the same in our guild. But I remember that one of the very first meetings, we had a priest come in, and he just simply brought the ethical and religious directives for Catholic medical care. As you know, it's 50 plus 54 or so directives. And I remember reading through those for the first time, and I went, this is just common sense medical care, right? There's nothing quote unquote Catholic about it, right? There really is, it's just good common sense, really proper care. And so I really tend to now, when I give lectures, particularly with the Catholic Medical Association, is really highlight the directives that drive maybe a certain process. And it really is amazing. Like, I found I was doing almost all of them my whole life, but it was so different all of a sudden to see it in print and to say, oh, that's why we do that. That's why that's a good idea. It's not just common sense.
It's interesting you make those points about you've been trying to do it, you didn't know they existed. And in that same vein, I learned about the spike system.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that system to help doctors discuss bad news with patients. And when I read them, I thought, oh, that's interesting. Somebody's actually put this together, formulated into a concrete document that could guide doctors and healthcare professionals in talking to patients with bad news. And could you share with us and walk through this, the spikes acronym?
Yeah, and so first of all, I would tell you that's exactly right. This, so it's a method of delivering bad news, and bad news can mean different things to different people, but bad news in general means giving patients kind of adverse knowledge, about their medical care or their future. So it can, for me, it's telling them they have cancer, or telling them that they have recurrent cancer, or telling them that, they have a new mass when they had cancer previously. So that's bad news. And, some people do it well, and some people don't do it very well, as patients are aware. And so the spikes is a system that allows us to reproducibly do something well, and to be able to teach that, right? To be able to teach that, because it is a learned behavior to some extent. And it's also, if I may just take one step before I go through it, it helps both people involved. So it's actually been proven, it's been around, since 2000, the idea, and there's been multiple studies on it in the medical literature, and it helps the physicians because we are able to do a better job of delivering bad news, and not have it psychologically effective. So it really helps with burnout, which, as you know, for physicians is a very big topic and problem today. It also helps patients because when they feel like they've gotten bad news in a good way, so to speak, in a way that is productive and appreciates their dignity, they actually have a better chance of following through with treatment and dealing psychologically with that treatment. So anyway, so how do you teach it? So SPIKES, S-P-I-K-E-S, actually is just an acronym for 6 different stages of providing that bad news. So the first is S, setting the stage. And that really means just, you don't want to do a drive-by shooting, right? I mean, if you're going to give bad news, you need to set the stage. You need to have a room that's private. You need to make sure that you can devote enough time to that conversation. You cannot do that in 3 minutes, right? So if you have an important phone call or something, you need to work around that to provide adequate time, privacy, to have the people there that they need to have around them, for support, that also need to hear it. And again, to do it in an environment that's respectful of them. So that's the S. And then the next is really, the P is assessing perception. So, I got my master's in education a couple of years ago, and one of the important things before you teach people is to understand their view of what you're about to teach, right? Because they may have a very different understanding of what's going on. So for patients in this situation, you need to find out, what do they believe is going on? Are they even sensing they may have recurrent cancer or cancer? And also, what's the emotional response to that? Are they fearful? Are they worried? Are they very positive about it? You need to kind of get that sense, so that as we say in the educational world, you want to get the inside out. What's inside their head. You need to get it out so that you can start on common ground, right? And then the I is obtaining an invitation to discuss it with them. Most patients actually nowadays, probably since at least the mid 70s, 80s, want to know the truth, right? We have this very paternalistic view sometimes that, they shouldn't know the truth. The reality is, and again, this is very much consistent with the religious directives, they should know the truth about themselves. They're entitled to that. And certainly, again, we talk about ethical principles. There is beneficence, right? You want to do what's in the best interest of the patient, But particularly since the 70s, 80s, the idea of autonomy, that patients have control of their own healthcare, has been really the number one, right, of the pillars of ethics. And so we have to be sensitive to that. And it is part of, so again, you need to let them know, but you need to know that they're okay with that, and how much information do they want. I've had a couple patients that really, it was obvious they didn't want to know very much the very first visit. And so we didn't discuss a whole bunch. We talked a little bit, but we didn't do a full exam. And then I invited them back a week later. And it was interesting. The lady went from scared to death, wouldn't talk about it, to a month later having major surgery for a cancer, because we just took our time. So anyway, the K is then the key point, right? Sharing knowledge, what you know, the information that you know. And my catchwords on this are, you need to present it honestly, but with charity, right? There is a loving way to prevent the truth, or to present the truth. And then there's dumping it on them, right? When you're in a hurry, or you don't want to deal with questions. This is honesty with charity. And that, again, they need to know the truth. You should present it in a way that they can understand it, but with love. And so again, here, I think, again, in education, those people who are into education, there's this ask, tell, ask kind of sense. Ask them what they know, tell them the truth, and then ask them again what they understand, and if they have more questions. So very important key. So that's really the basis. Then you really want to observe their emotion. That's the E. And respond with empathy. Again, another E there. That's the E in spikes. So observe their emotion, respond with empathy. Again, you present the information, you don't want to walk away. You really need to support them through that phase. I always have, a tissue box or something. It's really okay to touch patients and put your hand on their knee or their hand and help them through it. They want to know. That's one of the great things about being a surgeon. We get to touch people still, so many other specialties have gotten away from that, but we still need to touch our patients. And that's such an important bond, I think. And then lastly, the S stands for, developing a strategy and a summary, presenting a summary. And that's really just talking about then, okay, here's your diagnosis, step by step, how we got to it. Here are the treatment options. Here are the side effects that go with each of those. And then developing a plan ahead. And then, at that point, then we have to listen and take a cue, I always provide a recommendation. Patients will say, what should I do? And I'll say, the decision is yours. I don't want you to decide today. Go home, talk about it with other family. But in general, if you were my brother or my sister, when I was younger, I used to say if you were my mom or dad, but now it turns out they're never that old. They're always brothers and sisters. So I always say, if you're my brother or sister, this is what I would recommend for you. But, your decision will be based on that. Because I think patients deserve that, right? That's why I've been doing this for 30 years, right? They want to know my experience. They deserve that experience. But I always tell them, if you decide to do something else, I'll support you in that decision. So anyway, that's generally the spikes protocol.
And hearing you walk us through that, reminding me of the need to just be present.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so hard for physicians when they've got so much work they know needing to be done. They have an emergency down here and whatever. And it's just taking time, showing empathy. You've got a fund of knowledge, but you've got so many things going on, and that being present to people is so critical. That patients just like a magnet gravitate to that, because I think we need some work on that in the healthcare professions of being present.
Well, and I agree. And I think part of it is driven by, productivity metrics, that you're supposed to meet. And part of our responsibility is to push back a little bit. Hospitals make enough money in general, and there's no reason in my mind why, if you're busy, you have to improve your productivity 10% every year, and so at some point, you have to push back and go, you know what, 10 minutes is not an adequate time to see a patient, a cancer patient, even if it's for a healthy visit. And I've been blessed that I'm respected enough and old enough that people don't push back too much on me. But I always tell my graduates, when you leave, that's something you need to negotiate up front, is your schedule for how many patients you're going to see in a day, because look, it takes a certain amount of time to do this well. And you need to provide for that. That's part of your responsibility.
Brian, as we wrap this up, you're seeing cancer patients, severe disease. People are looking for hope or direction in a world that seems to be lost right now. Do you have any words of wisdom for them that you've learned in your own faith walk that you could just share with people before we...
Yeah. Well, number one, I think, I guess for a physician, I'll do it from both sides. For a physician, one of my most important things that I tell the resident is we need to care for people even when we can't cure them. Those are two different things, caring and curing. And we need to be sensitive to when we don't always need to treat somebody, right? We need to be sensitive to that, but we always need to care for them. From a patient perspective, I would say that I've been blessed. I haven't had a ton of suffering in my life, and I am very honest with patients about that. There are times we suffer, and I guess what has brought me a bit of solace during that time is that we offer that up, right, as kind of redemptive suffering, as sharing in the sufferings of Christ, because life is about suffering. We will all die, and we will all have troubles, and if we try and get away from it, we just we become unhappy, right? And just to try and be more accepting. Easy for me to say, but I think, and then second, which was where I was headed, it's important that people find physicians that they're comfortable with, and to talk to them. Some physicians will actually respond to, doctor, I love you, you've done so many great things, I need some answers, I need more time, or, doctor, you've been great, but you were rude to me the last time. I really think, to some extent, in a nice way, you have to drive your own care a bit. Right. Like it or not, that's the way medicine is today, is patients really need to take responsibility, and it may not be the patient, it may be their daughter, son, spouse, and choose good physicians, because there's good physicians out there who do all these things, and but you have to look a little bit. So I think that's part of it.
Well, for those residents, interns, practicing physicians, if they're Catholic and they want to look into the Catholic Medical Association, it'll help them foster and grow their faith. Healthcare professionals for Divine Mercy, they can Google that. And Marie has put up a lot of great talks by people like you. And I think today's talk really gives me hope, because it affirms that there are a lot of good doctors out there, and they're trying their best, and they're trying to be a reflection of Jesus Christ. And you can do that without putting it in people's face, but just the radiance of your face and the kindness you show and being present is very heartwarming to me. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Burkey, for being with us today on Mercy Unbound, and continue to spread God's mercy to the people you see who, as you mentioned, coming in afraid and needing answers. And wondering where this is all going. But if they cling to that Jesus, I trust in you, we all know they'll be fine, spiritually at least. So, but thank you again. God bless everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode of Mercy Unbound. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Brian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.